Imagine you are living in perpetual horror, where every howling wind outside the window could signal a deadly raid. Your home destroyed, your family torn apart, and your very existence could be erased in the blink of an eye. That was the terrifying reality that countless settlers and neighboring tribes faced in the chaotic era of the Wild West, where survival often depended on unceasing vigilance and extraordinary endurance. Amidst the myriad conflicts erupting on the frontier, the Apache tribes were notorious for their brutal methods of warfare, especially in their treatment of women. Those savage acts are a harsh reminder of the cruel and unforgiving nature of frontier life, where alliances were fragile and revenge often dictated the course of history. To explore this dark chapter of history, we must delve deep into the historical documents recording how the Apache tribes treated women during raids, captivity, and the methods they used to sow fear and control. Those stories, though difficult to confront, reveal a great deal about the social, political, and cultural pressures that drove such actions. Brutal raids and captivity. The Apache, known as fierce warriors and skilled survivalists, often relied on brutal raids as a method of asserting dominance and acquiring resources. These raids were not random acts of violence, but calculated strategies driven by the necessity to sustain their communities in the harsh environment of the Southwest. Women were particularly vulnerable during these attacks, as they were frequently targeted for capture. Once taken, they faced a grim fate. Their lives were no longer their own, as they became commodities of war and survival. Historical records detail accounts of women being tied and dragged for miles, enduring exhaustion, starvation, and emotional trauma. The Spanish friar Alonso de Benavides, writing in the 17th century, noted the indescribable suffering of captives taken by Apache warriors, a testament to the brutal methods used to assert dominance. Captivity often marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal for these women, who were subjected to forced labor, servitude, and worse. These raids also served to strike terror into settlers and rival tribes, ensuring that resistance was met with swift, unforgiving punishment. The fear they instilled was a powerful weapon in itself, creating psychological scars that lasted generations. Forced marriages. Among the most harrowing fates for women captured during Apache raids was the imposition of forced marriages. For the Apache, marriage served not only as a social bond, but also as a means of survival and assimilation. Captured women, often taken from settler communities or rival tribes, were coerced into such unions as part of their subjugation. These marriages were rarely consensual. They were mechanisms of control and domination, designed to integrate the captured into Apache society while erasing their original identities. The women, stripped of their homes, languages, and cultural ties, were forced into lives where they had little to no autonomy. Many became the property of their captors, subjected to strict roles of servitude, childbearing, and loyalty to their new families. These unions were not simply personal relationships, but were political tools, strengthening alliances and solidifying control over captives. The emotional and psychological toll of such marriages was immense. For women, it was not only a loss of freedom, but a total erasure of their former lives. This practice reflects the brutal realities of survival in the Wild West, where the concept of marriage could be distorted into a weapon of oppression. As Tacitus once observed in his study of ancient societies, the desire to dominate is part of human nature. In the Apache context, this domination manifested through forced marriages that left women trapped in lives of imposed loyalty and deep suffering. Scalping as a warning. Scalping, a practice often associated with the Native American tribes of the Wild West, was as much a psychological weapon as a physical act of violence. Among the Apache, scalping served as a dire warning to enemies, settlers, and captives. It was not simply an act of brutality, but a statement of dominance, meant to instill fear and assert control over a territory. The scalps, often taken from the heads of women, were sometimes displayed as trophies or markers of victory. For those who witnessed such acts, the message was clear. To oppose the Apache was to risk an agonizing death and the permanent marking of one's loss. The origins of scalping within Apache culture remain complex. Anthropological evidence suggests it may have been adopted or adapted from earlier traditions of warfare among tribes or influenced by European practices. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, wrote about similar customs among Scythians, noting, "They make themselves cloaks from the scalps of their foes." While the context differed, the symbolic weight was universal, a visible reminder of conquest. In the Wild West, scalping transcended individual victims. It functioned as a tool to deter settlers from advancing into Apache lands, reinforcing the fear of their raids. Though historical records document its use, it's crucial to acknowledge the brutal reciprocity of violence during this time. Settlers, soldiers, and bounty hunters were known to scalp Native Americans in turn, often motivated by financial incentives or sheer revenge. The Apache's use of scalping against women, however, represented an even darker layer of suffering, where women were both targeted as symbols of vulnerability and used to send a grim message to those who dared to challenge Apache dominance. Whipping and beating. The physical violence inflicted upon women during Apache raids often extended beyond captivity. Whipping and beating were common methods used to enforce control, punish defiance, or break the spirits of captives. These brutal acts, carried out with rawhide whips or clubs, were not only physically devastating, but also psychologically scarring. For many women, these punishments served as a grim reminder of their complete loss of autonomy. Apache captors wielded such violence to assert dominance, ensuring compliance from those who might otherwise resist. Historical accounts of this practice often come from settlers and captives who later documented their harrowing experiences. One such testimony comes from Olive Oatman, a young woman taken captive in 1851, who recounted the beatings inflicted upon her to instill obedience. While some details of her account have been debated, they underscore the broader pattern of violence captives endured. These acts highlight the harshness of life in a culture shaped by constant conflict and survival pressures. Burning and mutilation. Among the most horrifying acts committed during Apache conflicts was the use of burning and mutilation as tools of both punishment and psychological warfare. Captive women were often subjected to these brutal practices, either to instill fear or to send a clear, harrowing message to their enemies. Burning, whether inflicted through firebrands or by forcing captives to endure prolonged exposure to flames, was not merely an act of cruelty. It was a deliberate demonstration of power. Such acts were intended to reduce captives to symbols of suffering and submission, ensuring that those who opposed the Apache understood the stakes. Mutilation often followed, leaving scars, both physical and symbolic, on the victims. Captives might have their fingers severed, faces disfigured, or other forms of brutal bodily harm inflicted to mark them permanently. These practices often went beyond punishment, serving as stark warnings to rival tribes or settlers. For the Apache, such displays reinforced their dominance, carving a reputation for ferocity into the very bodies of their victims. Accounts from settlers and military records document these acts with grim detail, highlighting the sheer terror they invoked among those on the receiving end. Apache women, too, were often subjected to mutilation or burning by settlers and rival groups, as cycles of revenge fueled endless bloodshed. For the women who survived such ordeals, their scars became lasting reminders of a time when survival meant enduring the unimaginable. The terrible acts committed by the Apache against women in the Wild West serve as a chilling reminder of the brutality and complexity of frontier life. From violent raids and forced marriages to scalping, physical abuse, and psychological torment, these practices reveal a harsh world where survival often demanded unthinkable measures. As we reflect on these grim realities, we must ask ourselves, what lessons can we draw from the suffering endured by these women? How does this chapter of history shape our understanding of power, survival, and humanity? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Engage with this history by liking, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell to uncover more stories that delve deep into the complexities of our past. Your perspective matters in preserving and interpreting history.